This is one of those gospels, isn't it, that people have said to me throughout the years, he can't really mean that, does he? I mean, Jesus is too much of an idealist. We're human after all. We come up short. There's truth in that. But isn't it true that we need people throughout the centuries who call us to the ideal, to be inspired to at least move a little further in that direction? And the reality, even starting with love your enemies. And I'll reflect upon that in a moment. But again, thinking back when I was reading this scripture and praying over it, that just a few weeks ago, I talked to a woman. She was at a community event that I've known for a number of years, and she wanted to vent with me about hostile feelings that she had toward her brother. As she told me, ever since Christmas, they had not been talking. Here's the deal with the two of them, and you need to hear both. She does not like President Trump, what he's doing and how he's doing it. Her brother sees President Trump as finally doing something about waste in government and mismanagement by bureaucrats. Her brother doesn't like some of the ways that President Trump talks about people and issues, but still believes what is most important is the bold action he is taking. The two of them can't stand to be around each other anymore. Even to the point, and she's saying that, of like hurtful and hateful attitudes toward her brother and believing he's doing the same. They had always been a close family and caring there for one another. But as she mentioned, starting with herself, and I asked, she sees her brother is the fault of the family not divided. And of course, I said, well, in some way, because she's very hostile toward him too, in some way, do you have something there? Even if you see yourself as right and good and this is important, but the hostility on the personal level, which we're talking about here, because this is surfacing all over the place, beginning in family life. And so as we look at this, we need to see, and I want to make this clear, this particular homily, the focus is not on President Trump, although there does need to be in our nation overall a greater conversation, respect, and honest and caring from different points of view about what is going on and how best to respond on a national level and in our own family situations. You know, so for example, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Are you aware of any families or friends or church groups or even yourself that is caught up in this kind of hostility? There can be differences, but I'm talking about hostility to the point of even hate. And we read about that. Many people have shared with me about some of their family circumstances. And so now we get to that and we say, how helpful or how difficult is Jesus' comment, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Again, is this Jesus getting way too carried away? And yet, don't we know for anybody, including Jesus, it's okay. You're saying this, show me that you live it. Look up there every week. He lived it. He just didn't talk it. He did walk the walk. And we know, can you imagine the hostility, the rejection, his being put down, the ones who on Palm Sunday said, we praise you, you're the Messiah. On Friday saying, crucify him, crucify him. And yet Jesus said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. That may be part of it too. And we need to understand what forgive means. And to know that too often all of us can get caught up in not knowing what we're really doing, pointing the finger at others and not looking at ourselves. And so, is any of Jesus' teaching here insightful? And especially responding to the attitudes we have today. And why does Jesus want us to do something so difficult as to love our apparent enemies. You know, even in our interpersonal relations, do our actual practices often ignore Jesus' command? You know, the great golden rule, we all know it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But rather, can't we all get caught up in it, at least at times, in saying, no, do unto others before they do unto you. And almost looking at at reason to be hostile. Again, we're not talking about differences. We can have them. We've always had them. And they can even be strong. But if they keep us distant from one another, failing to love one another, not wanting to have anything to do with one another, is that really what Jesus wants us as his followers to be about? And you can see that, again, looking at the approach, this, well, love your enemies. Okay, it sounds too idealistic. But look at what we have. Is what we have in an interpersonal or national or worldwide level really working? Should we be satisfied when we look at the negativity, the hostility, the hate that often we can see? We can see it in newspapers, watching various social media channels, online comments from people. Look at the situation in the Middle East, Ukraine, Russia. Recognize a number of our people in our society who are addressing their disputes with hurtful and hateful comments. Lawsuits that can even become extremely hostile. I know, for example, and it's sad to say, I know couples that have been lawyers that have been working with couples that are possibly going through a divorce. What they tell me, and even the lawyers hate it, is sometimes they want to have greater hostility on both sides rather than trying to look at a very difficult situation, even with their children, about is there healing, is there hope, or is there at least some peaceful resolution rather than hate and vile attitudes. And we know the reality of guns today. People choosing to use that in some situations rather than seeking first understanding. So, as we look at this, we all talked about Lent coming up. We all need to take a deeper, prayerful, and humble self-awareness of how even in small matters, we are holding grudges that are affecting our relationships. We can often see them in others, but do we see them in ourselves? Maybe each of us to reflect. Am I satisfied with the way negativity is shaping my life? Do I find that holding on to resentments with family or friends is wearing me down? Am I satisfied with the kind of world that emerges when we respond primarily with hate and hurt, when we do to others what they have done to us? Most of us would admit that such a world, if we all lived that way, is a disaster. And getting even can be self-destructive, because when we keep resentment in our own hearts, it's us who are poisoning our own mind. In addition to Jesus saying, love your enemies, he commands, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. There again, do we do that? You know, and that prayer for others, don't we realize when we're praying for others, even the ones we disagree with or don't like that, when we pray for them, certainly they need our prayer, and we need to pray for them because we need to pray. We need to say, Lord, help me to see other people through your eyes and love other people with your heart. Again, we're not saying it's just all warm and fuzzy, but where's our initial attitude? And as we look at that notion of love your enemies. Too often, I think, we hear the word in Jesus, well, it's an emotional thing. Or, you know, we have the notion of romantic love in our culture. That's not what Jesus is talking about. We can certainly have feelings that we hope we don't move to hostility, but feelings strongly of standing up for people and looking for the good and recognizing that there are people in our life who need, if they're not being as loving, our loving them can challenge them. People who are being hurtful of others, they need to see, and sometimes we may need to bring it up respectfully and lovingly, consequences for their actions, helping them to see what they're doing, but not in a shouting match. And helping them to see, helping us to see that when we do that kind of wrong to others, it does matter. And it does need to be challenged in love. That's the most challenging love. And as we do that, we know that we're saying we need to respond to our enemy and choose to do so in a way that breaks the cycle of violence rather than feeding it. We choose not to hate because we know that hating will only lessen our life and endanger our world. Finally, I want to use an example you've heard me use before because I think it does come to that interpersonal. Many of you have already heard me say that, my biological dad abandoned my mom when she was pregnant with me. 4 years later, she met somebody else, brought us to Akron, Ohio, married to him for 4 years. He was an alcoholic. My mom left. She raised me on her own. There was a lot of hurt and resentment and feelings, I know, back then when that first happened, for my mom and in many ways protecting me more than I realized. That was 1955 when they separated. In 1974, I was ordained. In 1975, my stepdad, my mom and stepdad never divorced, developed cancer. And he was all on his own in his house. My mom made the choice. And she had just become Catholic not long before. She made the choice, and there was a healing in her, to go and live with him for 2 years and be with him every day in his cancer. And she didn't do that in kind of a negative tone. No, she really had been touched by the Lord to forgive this man, to be there for him in his hour of need. Absolutely amazing. And I remember I did it as he was very ill, and it was actually the night before he died. I didn't know it. I was at the hospital with him there, and he was still doing okay. But he wanted to speak to me. He was a very introverted, many uptight person, probably from his own background. But I said, what do you want to say to me? I remember him saying the word, Norman, I know I was difficult to love. Thank you, and thank your mom for loving me anyway. And then the next day he died. But I know the difference. The difference. Can we still choose to love? Doesn't do away with what he did to us, but says, not going to let that be the primary influence in our life. Take a moment. Maybe there's something we need to hear in a family level and in a personal level, a national or international level, of what does it mean to love our enemy, to bless our persecutors, and to work to bring less violence and more mercy. Not easy mercy, but mercy that lifts up, as I saw the huge difference in my stepfather. Take a moment, as I often say, to think about what we each need to hear. God bless you.